That's awful, because if you've worked clinically and you see people get these tests, they're afraid to eat those other foods.
They're terrified. They're absolutely terrified. And also, like, I get the terror. I've literally peeled my skin off my face. It's like, you will do anything, and you do feel a lot of fear. I would love to hear, like, I want to, like, God, I wish that, like, somebody who knows more than us or has been deeper in this field would hear this and be like, hey, here's this other evidence, or hey, you're right, this is the only study that backs it. Because when I think about this, it triggers in me this thing that's like, you can't do that. That is batshit crazy. Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing.
Really cool stuff.
We're here with part 2.
Welcome back.
Part 2 of the gluten episode. This is Influence to Death. My name is Victoria Lafont.
I'm Hannah Wright, and today we're going to cover what we didn't get to last time in our first gluten episode. So I think we're going to be talking about symptoms of gluten sensitivity or celiac disease that you would not expect, and that are actually very prevalent and overlooked. The phenomenon of being able to eat wheat in Europe and be fine, which I've heard so many people tell me that. And then I would like to touch on the link between gluten sensitivity and psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and mental health.
Yeah, God, you know, if people are interested in that topic, it would be great to have Sarah Russell back on, because I know she has researched that extensively, and she's so good at talking about the research studies that she's read, because she has a photographic memory, which is amazing.
So cool.
We're also going to talk about if cross-reactive foods are a thing in the world of functional medicine. That's something you hear about a lot, is like, if you have a sensitivity or some type of reactivity to gluten, that you might not be able to eat these other foods also. I felt pretty proud of some investigative digging we did into that question. And I'm just looking to see if there are any other topics, a little more specificity on, like, if you're, I think you said this maybe, Hannah, like, are you sensitive to gluten? Are you celiac? Are you allergic to wheat? Like, what are the differences between those classifications? Yeah, so we have quite a bit, still more to cover. Although I do want to give some updates. So, and then please chime in. So the first has to do with our continuous glucose monitor episode. Do you get Medscape's emails?
No.
Okay, I get them like 3 a day sometimes, and I love them. And then actually this morning I was looking through some of the mailings, and I was like, I don't even know how I got on this list. And I don't even know if their synopsis of the studies that they send out, I don't even know if it's reliable. But somehow, somewhere, I kind of want to say that maybe Dr. Heather Zwicky is who turned us on to Medscape during immunology. But it's been so long now. So essentially, you can sign up for these emails. It's medscape.com, and they give synopsis of new research that's coming out. It's wonderful. They give a little brief article, and then they link to the actual study. Personally, I feel like I would be even more enthusiastic about recommending it if I went through the article and did a side-by-side with the actual study, which I have not done yet. So I can't speak to the, like, exactly how accurate the article is that they send out. But there's really interesting topics they talk about. Actually, Hannah, I saved an email that I have to forward to you about low and no calorie sweeteners that they sent out from yesterday. So I will forward that to your inbox. But for the continuous glucose monitor episode, the study that they sent out, it was a couple days ago, is a new study in the journal Diabetes Care. So it talks about they essentially looked at 3 different types of continuous glucose monitors. The name of the article is One Patient, 3 Different CGMs, 3 Glucose Profiles. So it's interesting because, in our episode on continuous glucose monitors, one of the points that we covered was how reliable is the reading that you get from the device that you're using. So if I remember correctly, I know you've used one, you have like a more personal experience, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like you calibrate yourself to that monitor And then you can see like, okay, the readings change because like you're testing your glucose in one way with just like a blood prick test. And then you calibrate based on the results of that to the monitor that you're using.
Yeah,
Is
that's what
that
I
right?
had to do. I don't know if everyone has to do that, and maybe they're more advanced now. Like the tech has gotten better, but I calibrated mine because my number was really weird
Mm-hmm.
on the CGM itself and on their, the info they provide. They said if it's like way off, try to do a finger prick, check your glucose that way, and
Right.
then calibrate it. Yeah.
So you get, I'm also realizing my voice is shaking, I think, because I've had so much caffeine. I
I
got some
can't
new
hear it.
matcha and I'm like, wow, it's really strong. Like, whew, okay, so deep breath. You have some essentially, I'm trying to remember, like precision would be the correct
Mhm.
term between you and the monitor that you're using. In this study, what they were looking at was, are monitors, are they reliable from monitor to monitor? So
Right.
essentially, like what they found is that depending on the monitor that you use, you may get different results. So in this study, it was not in people without pathology, it was in people who have type 1 diabetes. So if you're somebody who does not have a metabolic disease and you're using a continuous glucose monitor, this study might not apply to you. I just think that's important to say.
Mhm.
This was in people that have an autoimmune disease, type 1 diabetes. So it's like particularly important for this population to have an accurate read. So the kind of the outline of the study, it was in Germany and they wanted to look at the differences in the metrics that came from different devices. It was 23 people. They were kind of in their early 50s, and they used 3 different devices: the Freestyle Libre 3, which we talked about in our
Mhm.
episode because of Abbott owns that company. The Dexcom G7, they all sound like spaceships.
I know.
And it's unbelievable. I'm just like, whoa, why is that? And the Medtronic Simplera. So they just wore these how usually people would use a continuous glucose monitor. They were just like in their home eating the food that they would normally eat. And what they found is that there were differences, there were like meaningful differences in between these monitors depending on the device. So they lay out like the Free Libre compared to, I have to get these names right, the Dexcom G7 were comparable, but they were higher than those of the Medtronic Simplera
Hmm.
by like 14% and 11%, which
So with
is,
that, I mean, like even 2 units difference is huge for glucose. So if it's like 90 versus 92,
okay,
that's a
right.
big difference.
So let's say like what is it's like around 90 milligrams per deciliter is kind of like a
Hmm.
good fasting glucose read. So I'm just thinking if it's 14% higher than 90 as like a baseline,
Wait,
I'm doing,
90 would be high for fasting. Is
I
that the
think
same unit?
89 milligrams per deciliter is like middle of the road. I think
It
Walsh
is
might have taught a little lower, but it's like 89 is like
89.
the most popular functional. For some reason, that has stuck in my head for, do you know why? I have the binder still where I studied functional blood chem and I wrote it on the front of the binder for some reason. And so I saw that number for like years, but it's like Walsh's were different that he taught
Yeah.
us. But yeah, when I studied with,
But on like on your CBC, that would be like the range they would give you. Like 90 would be like healthy fasting.
yeah,
I think it's high, but maybe that's just me. Okay, so
yeah, if
sorry
it's,
to interrupt. I was just
yeah,
like, wait a minute.
but I think okay, it's an awesome thing that you said though because it brings it in the conversation of like what is a healthy fasting glucose.
Right.
It's a great question. Brian Walsh taught us ranges that Dr. Brian Walsh and
Hmm.
Julie is also a doctor, his wife, they teach together, taught us ranges that showed based on research studies that a lower fasting glucose than 89, which is the most popular kind of middle of the road
Hmm.
functional read, was actually better health outcomes.
Right.
So to your point, that might not be right. Let's just okay, let's say 85 times 14, like if there's a 14% increase, that would turn 85 milligrams per deciliter into about 96.
That's a huge
It's
difference.
different. Yeah, I mean
That's
that's
like when you go up a little higher, that'd be diagnosing like pre-diabetes versus healthy. That's like a big
yeah.
deal.
So
Yeah.
again, it was in type 1 diabetics, this study. I think this is just good like research reading is like, by the way, if you're listening, it's good to know you can't apply a study done on a population that is not you to you. So like
Hmm.
you can draw maybe like some information. Like, for instance, we probably know from this study that different continuous glucose monitors are going to provide different information depending on the one you get. But I just want to make sure people understand that it's like this was in that diseased population, not in a healthy
Mhm.
population, monitoring it just for like general information. So it might be different in people who don't have a metabolic disease.
Right, exactly. And I think that in our CGM episode, there was a study that you found that kind of showed that in healthy people, it was hard to reproduce
Even
the
harder.
results for healthy people because their glucose had more variability than
Yes.
someone with diabetes, type 1 or type 2, or like metabolic disease. So
Yeah.
that's
So actually,
also
as a healthy person, your readings might be even more
wackier. Yeah, they
inaccurate.
might be doing all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah. So
that's cool.
their kind of findings, it says like in individuals, difference between these different monitors were as high as 9.8%, 11.9%, 13.4%. Like there are these different time ranges
Mhm.
that they use to see like, okay, how different are they? The highest individual difference in time below range was a category was 12.9% between the Free Libre and the Medtronic Simplera.
Mhm.
So this is the important part. The readings that people get, they influence the therapy, right? So whether they should take insulin or not, that's really, really important for this specific
Yeah.
population. And then I also think like, okay, let's say somebody is healthy and they're getting this information. Are they like drastically changing their diet based on these readings? Are they like totally rewiring their brain and their limbic system to think like something's wrong when maybe it's actually not? It's just the device that they're using.
Yeah, that's pretty intense. That's
Yeah.
serious.
So we'll link to that in the show notes. I just thought that that was neat. And then Medscape, I love this as a way to stay on top of new research, but I could do my due diligence a little bit more to make sure that their articles are exactly what the study is saying. And then the second update that I wanted to give is on the paper, this freaking clinical trial. It's like taken me to the edges of the internet. And even today, the link to the clinical trial that I
This is
found,
for colostrum, is that
colostrum,
right?
yeah, on this certain brand of colostrum that is like, I wouldn't be surprised if they have a billboard in, what's Times Square in New York
Yeah.
City. It's everywhere. Every influencer. I've seen so many six packs on my Instagram feed, people eating this freaking colostrum. It's going to make me sick. Anyway, all of their claims are based on, they're like, we had this clinical trial done. And it's like, okay, yes, they did. I'm going to link, I think I can figure out in Substack how to attach the actual paper, because even the clinicaltrials.gov link that I posted, it was 100% working when I posted it the other day. And now for some reason, all of clinicaltrials.gov, at least 10 minutes ago, was not. I'm checking again to see if clinicaltrials.gov is back up. There's like
Yeah.
I don't know how to call it, it's not loading the site. There's like
Right.
an error. Oh, it is back up. Okay.
It's back up now.
So maybe the link is working here. I'm just going to check to see if the link is working now. But I'm going to link the whole freaking paper so that people can read it. Also, just full transparency, I butchered the synopsis of this paper. It was a survey study of, I think, 60 people.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you said
60
500, so it's even less.
till I was very wrong.
Even less. Yeah.
I needed this new matcha that day. And the way that the study was set up is that the 60 participants were split into two groups. The first group had self reported, basically digestive issues. And then the second group was physically active, but both groups took the colostrum. So there was no like a group that didn't take the colostrum and the group that did take the
Hmm.
colostrum. Everybody took the colostrum. And then the findings that this company is advertising were from surveys given to both groups about energy, mood, skin health, stress, fitness, and overall well-being. After 12 weeks of taking the colostrum, they did actually do a biometric. They ran C-reactive protein, but that did not change
Oh,
with.
sorry, I'm laughing.
No, you don't have
I
to.
was
Well,
I was like, oh, what did it? Oh no.
everybody, sorry.
Okay.
So this is there. Yeah. So my bad. I totally flubbed that up, but we're linking to the full paper and I overestimated the amount of participants. The end result that we reported though is still the same, which is actually, you're right. It's actually worse. Instead
It's
of
worse,
hundreds
yeah.
of people, it was only 60. And the way that they advertise the findings, it's like 86% better skin health. It's like, yeah, based on a survey of 60 people and they knew they were taking colostrum. It wasn't like
There was no blinding, there was no control, and the one biometric they did do had no improvement.
which is, by the way, C-reactive protein, complement reactive protein. It's a marker of the immune system that it tells you about an inflammatory response in people. Colostrum is amazing in a lot of different ways, and it does affect the immune system. And this group of 60 people, it did not affect that particular part of their immune functioning. And it drives me nuts because I think, we did a great job of outlining this on the episode, are wonderful effects of colostrum, but the studies on skin, hair, like these more like aesthetic kind of outcomes, they're not at all conclusive or convincing that colostrum is the thing for that.
Right.
But this company advertises it like it is based on this like clinical trial. And so you hear it and you're like,
$100 for
science. Yeah. Anyway, we will post the actual paper. I will figure this out if I have to freaking screenshot the pages and upload them as images on Substack. So those are our updates. Just every time I like look a little bit deeper into something, I'm like, may God have mercy on our souls. What is actually true?
I know. It's so frustrating.
It's so frustrating.
All right. Are we ready to talk about gluten?
Yes, I have to dig myself out of this depressive hole I've put myself in. Okay, so we kind of stopped with we talked about, the influencers discussing, can you heal celiac disease? There's some really interesting research we found around that. It looks like up next, can you actually eat gluten in Europe? And Sarah talked about this a little bit on her episode with the pregnancy blood markers, Sarah Russell. But yeah, I mean, how many people have told you like, I ate all the gluten when I went to Italy?
A lot. And they'll be like, oh, well, you just need to go to, when they find out I'm gluten-free, when you go to Europe, you'll be able to eat gluten. Actually, the last time I was in Europe, well, not the last time, but when I was still eating gluten when I was in Europe, when I was like 20, I think.
Explosive diarrhea.
I was in France and I was still eating gluten. That was before I even knew anything about gluten or gluten sensitivity or celiac disease. And I lost like 20 pounds. I was there for 5 weeks. And I was eating croissants, crepes, tons of bread. I mean, my whole diet was wheat. It was delicious.
Yeah.
I can like still taste. I'm like, oh, that was amazing. I lost so much weight. My skin was awful. I mean, it was just like, so when people tell me that, I'm like, yeah, I've tried that. And maybe even at that time, most of the wheat was grown there. But now, this is what Sarah brought up, which is kind of hilarious to me, is that a lot of the wheat that people are eating in different European countries is actually wheat grown here and exported
to Italy. Yeah.
So what's happening? That's my question. Like, what's happening if people are having no symptoms? I have a couple of ideas. I would love to hear your ideas too.
I can't wait to hear yours. I'm going to drink some more of this jet fuel.
After we talked about last time that there potentially could be a tolerance, even for people with celiac disease on an individual level, I think that if someone was here in the United States, they had been gluten-free, strict gluten-free for 10 years, I don't know, 5 years, even a year, and their gut healed very well and their immune system regulated, and then they go to Europe and they're like, I'm just going to have a little and try it, and they're fine.
Yeah.
Because they're still under that threshold. And then they'll have a little more and a little more. And then you combine that with being on vacation, having a different pace of life, having no stress, no work, you're walking, you're outside, you're, hitting that lifestyle factor of like having a slow meal and a glass of wine and like laughing with your friends and all of the things that actually we know has incredible benefit for your health and the way your immune system and nervous system regulates.
Yeah.
And so they keep tolerating it. And you're there for maybe 3 weeks or something max. That's a short period of time. Then you come back and you maybe are getting close to your threshold and you're like, I'm going to try some wheat here. And you start having symptoms. I think it's like this weird, just like turn of events that like lines up in a way that gives you this perception that the wheat is actually different there, and for some reason it's not triggering your immune system or whatever, but it really is much more than that. And then also the idea that if it is wheat that's grown there and processed differently, it's not affecting your immune system in the same way. I think that's like a hypothesis that a lot of people have that's in the research. Like
Is it
Yeah.
the glyphosate? Is it the
Right.
refinement or some, yeah, is there something different with wheat
And I think there's
here?
credibility there. Like that's something to be aware of for sure.
Mhm.
You know, ultra processing a protein, your body, I mean, regardless of celiac disease, if you have an allergy or a sensitivity to a food where you're having an immune reaction, you know, your body responds to proteins differently depending on how they're processed. So, like,
Yeah.
if you're have a egg sensitivity, you might
Yes.
figure out that you can tolerate a hard boiled egg fine, doesn't cause any GI symptoms. But if you have a scrambled egg, you're like running to the bathroom. That's like a
Mhm.
real thing.
You
And it's
did
because
great research on that.
it's
Like,
fascinating. I've had
yeah.
clients who have had that experience, and it makes it really hard to figure out what food you're sensitive to when you realize
Mhm.
you're reacting to the protein being cooked in a different way, you
Right.
know? And then your
Right.
immune system getting triggered by that.
God, we should find those. I do remember you doing that writing on like where people are like, wait, I can have it like in a baked good or in like certain circumstances. And then in
Mhm.
others, it does. And the research you found on that, I mean, it's a little bit of a different episode.
Yeah.
But I remember those articles that you
We
wrote.
should do that when we do an episode on the food sensitivity panels, like the Everly Well or whatever. That's really
Oh my
popular. The
God.
IgG. That's
I actually had that
let's do an
conversation with
episode
a
on
good
that.
friend the last time I was in Kentucky because her kid might need food sensitivity testing. And so she was like, what do you think? And I was like, you have to call me because, or let me leave you some type of like voice memo. Let me explain IgE versus IgG and the subtypes of IgG. Like it's more complex than you just order a random
Right.
test off the internet.
And then interpret it all by yourself, try to figure it
Right.
out and
Yeah.
change your
And
whole diet
feel
and
scared to death. I think
yeah.
you're onto something, Hannah, 100%. I mean, I have the same thoughts and all, but I hadn't thought of this before where it's like, yeah, you're not on vacation for 3 months. You might
Mhm.
start to see symptoms if you're
Mhm. Yeah.
following, a less strict diet for that amount of time.
And lots of people in Europe have celiac disease. In
Right.
fact, like in some countries, it's extremely easy to eat gluten-free
Yeah.
because so many people have it. Like in Italy, like it's so easy to eat gluten-free pasta, pizza, gnocchi
Yeah.
because there's a high prevalence of celiac disease. I think they may even subsidize citizens and give them extra money because gluten-free food's more expensive.
I'm looking at the prevalence in Italy. I mean, there's a
And then
reason that tons of celiac research is from Italian labs.
mhm.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit higher. It's 1.65% in Italy, and I think like the worldwide prevalence is like right at 1%.
Yeah. Yeah. I think,
Yeah,
yeah. So I don't know. I think that's,
maybe not legit, right? And to your point about, like have you hit your threshold? Have you not hit your threshold? I just want to tell people to check out the actual Substack posting of the gluten episode that we did because there is an account, Medical Herbalism. It's Paul is the man's name. I'm not going to say his last name just because maybe he does not have that published on Substack. I happen to know like he is very informed about nutrition and herbs and like that. He left some comments on that episode that I think are worthwhile for people to
mhm.
look at where he's super graceful, but he's like, hey, I'm not sure that what you all are talking about in that study is actually happening. Like, so he wrote, if someone defines tolerance as a biopsy negative for venous atrophy, which is an atrophying of the villi and the small intestine, it is not really tolerance at all. It is silent, destructive, systemic inflammation. It is very interesting. Like he posted some super informed, interesting comments. So
Mhm.
he like kind of disagreed with us. Maybe he a lot disagreed with us. He didn't say one way or the other though. He was very nice. But go and check those out because I think it's from a person who's informed and
Yeah.
you know, might
You
be the
know,
truth.
that makes sense to me. And I remember when we learned about celiac diagnosis with the, villus atrophy, and you have to have a certain Marsh score. So the Marsh score is like how messed up is the villi of,
Right.
you know, if it's like really messed up, which is like, I don't know, a 3 or 4,
Yeah,
something
that's
like
right.
that, then you're positive you have celiac disease.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's only a little messed up,
Right.
like it's like a 1 or 2, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard because, like, maybe it's not so bad now, but it's a little bit bad and you're having
Yeah.
symptoms, but they're going to tell you that you're fine and you can keep eating gluten until it gets so bad that
Yeah.
you have the severe damage and malabsorption because your villi is in such bad condition. And then they'll say, okay, yep, you're positive, can't have it anymore. So yeah, that's it. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, what is that?
I
absurd.
mean, that is like the one of the primary kind of stands of functional medicine compared to conventional medicine is like, let's look at the pattern and the
Hmm.
context versus just like this cutoff. That is, I think, a fantastic approach. Is also something I just want to say, at least here. I mean, I have a lot of access here in Boston to really great medical doctors here. Absolutely look at the pattern. They're not just like, well, you're at, 5.6%, HA1C or 5.7%. Like, we're just going to wait till you have full blown diabetes to do anything. They're like, hey, you're sneaking up. Quit being
Hmm.
a dumbass, or we need to get your genes checked, or whatever, the story is. So this is kind of multifaceted. That is how kind of functional medicine branched off, one of the stances that they took. And so I think you're exactly right. If you start to see it going in a direction and it's getting worse, like, how about you take care of it now?
Hmm.
And I also think that it's important to say, like, conventional medicine there's changes that are happening. And I think it's really important that we're like, oh, hey, that is happening.
Hmm.
Maybe now when people get diagnosed, it is with a lower Marsh score where they're like, I don't know, because I actually have not seen a patient in years that has gotten tested. So it may be a little bit different now, but yeah, to your point, don't keep doing the thing that is probably making the atrophy worse if you know it's
Right.
happening to begin with. I like have it come up sometimes where I'm like, I wonder what happens when people eat, let's say, like a really like fiber poor ketogenic diet, like kind of maybe a not super conscious ketogenic diet, and they're eating so much fat, because we know about fat's negative impact, not only on the
Hmm.
microbiome, but on intestinal permeability and on villi health. It's like, it's very interesting that like grains and gluten have gotten this reputation, but like there are other compounds in a healthy diet even, that when out of balance can cause damage.
Hmm.
And I kind of like think to myself sometimes, like, because like, let's say you're on a ketogenic diet and you're losing weight, there's something about that like feels good. Whereas if you're like eating, tons of processed grain, or even like a whole food diet and grain, and maybe you're gaining weight, or you're seeing like blood sugar imbalances, or you're having a negative reaction, it like aesthetically or in your body doesn't feel as good. It's
Hmm.
like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean when I say that?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, like maybe the high fat diet, you're losing weight because of how it's affecting your gut health and microbiome, and not just because of your, like, maybe there's some malabsorption. Is that what you mean?
Well, like on ketogenic diet, people lose weight just because, it's like fasting mimicking. And
Right.
but it like feels so good to them aesthetically, or you feel it feels good sometimes when you lose weight and you need
Hmm.
to lose some weight, that they're like, well, they're not paying as much attention to the possible negatives.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
yeah, there's like pros and cons to both. And I think overarching of all of this is like, it's why it's great to run this by somebody who is a good clinician. It's like, that might be a very important part, or to think this through in a very critical way versus like, I've lost weight or I've gained weight or this or that. It's like, there's more to it than that. But I think we get stuck in those. It's a bias. We get
Hmm.
stuck in those biases.
Hmm.
Anyway, people, read his comments. He's sharp. I'm looking to see like what is next on the lineup of
I think we have
the
the
gluten.
cross-reactive
Great.
foods. I don't know if you want to touch on that, and
Oh my
then
God.
we can
Yeah.
talk about the symptoms that are really important to take note of, that people don't realize are a sign of gluten sensitivity.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that we have time for you to talk about the psychiatric symptoms that come up. So this is an interesting topic, I think, specifically because there is the testing company Cyrex. A lot of functional practitioners use their tests. I have not looked deeply into every single test that they run. We actually used to run a couple of their different tests. They had an autoimmune markers panel, food sensitivity testing, but they have, I think it's Array 4.
Hmm.
I'm going to double check myself.
That
I can
sounds
just
right.
Google Cyrex. Array 4, if, yeah, gluten cross reactive foods, Array. God, retail, I'm trying to think like how much this test costs. Wholesale, it was a couple $100. So, then when you give the test to a client, you make a little bit of money on it. You upsell
Hmm.
it. So essentially, the goal of the test was, if somebody is on a they need to be on a gluten-free diet, but they're still having reaction. Possibly they are having what's called cross-reactivity to these other foods because the proteins in those foods are similar to gluten.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of what they say is like if somebody has non-celiac gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, it's like their immune system kind of like doesn't recognize the differences between those proteins. And so it reacts even though that food is technically gluten-free. So they have this array. And I actually just did a post on Facebook not long ago to be like, hey, who out there still runs Array 4?
Mm-hmm.
It's on, like, for instance, Rupa Health offers it, Cyrex for sure offers it
Mm-hmm.
directly. It's out there. I mean, have you kind of
Yeah, I'm aware of that test and people using it. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So we started to look into like what is this test based on? Like is cross reactivity an actual thing?
Mm-hmm.
Actually from direction of a mentor that I really trusted and still do. So the background study that this is posted or is based
Based on.
on, uh, it looks like this is what I found is just one paper. It's a 2012 study by Aristo Vajani, may not be pronouncing his name right, and Igal Tarash. Vajani went on, I think he was like an advisor for Cyrex Labs, um, and maybe like a teacher at Cyrex. He has a few different papers published in the nutrition space. It's an in vitro study, so that means it's not done in
Oh,
humans. It's done. I thought you totally remembered this. Like we did this
no,
research a
this
little bit
is,
together, but
I'm just like, womp, womp, man.
yeah, so it gets even better. So it's an in vitro study, so it's done, like in lab equipment. It's not done in humans. And so in the paper, the claim is that those with celiac disease should avoid certain non-glutinous foods, and the list is pretty long.
Yeah, it's
So
like coffee, oats, sugar. I
coffee,
mean, there's like all these foods that you
yeah,
wouldn't think from what I remember.
different dairy proteins,
Huh.
yeast, quinoa, potatoes. Just like felt my heart break. Milk chocolate, whey. Okay, God, whey. We have to come back to even talk about whey, hemp,
Hmm.
rice, these different foods. And so in the study, the way that it was done, these rabbits were injected with purified gluten protein.
Which is probably a pretty strong dose of.
I mean, just I'm like, where do we start? It's a rabbit. It's like going directly into the bloodstream. It's like the purified protein. Okay. So, that's like the primary protein that's present in gluten. So after 4 weeks, after this, injection, they drew their blood, and the antibodies to the gluten were isolated. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Antibodies just present in their blood were
Hmm.
isolated and used to create anti-gluten antibodies.
Hmm.
And then these antibodies were then combined with different food proteins, the list of food proteins that are on this array 4. So they essentially were looking, like, let me break that down. They were looking at the antibodies in the blood of the rabbits after they were injected with these gluten proteins and then combining them with these different foods to see like what would they react to.
Right.
So when they were combined with gluten, they were the most active. And then
Hmm.
some activity was observed when the proteins were combined with dairy, yeast, oats, corn, millet, milk chocolate, instant coffee, and rice. So I don't think even all of the foods on the list, just this handful,
Hmm.
that is the only study. There may be other studies that I'm not aware of. Let me be fully transparent, but that's the only study that I could find that backed the validity of this test.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I
What the
know. I know. I
That's
know.
awful.
Um,
That's awful because if you've worked clinically and you see people get these tests, they're afraid to eat those other
they're
foods.
terrified. They're absolutely terrified. And also like I get the terror. I've literally peeled my skin off my face. It's like you will do anything and you do feel a lot of
Yeah.
fear. I would love to hear like I want to like God, I wish that like somebody who knows more than us or has been
Mhm.
deeper in this field would hear this and be like, "Hey, here's this other evidence," or "Hey, you're right. This is the only study that backs it." Because when I think about this, it triggers in me this thing that's like, you can't do that. That
Right.
is batshit crazy.
It's like way worse than the colostrum one where it's
Oh,
like
it's
totally misrepresented. That's like it's way way worse. I mean, first the patient's paying probably $300 for this test.
let's see what the
It's
retail
telling
price
them
is.
they're reacting to all these foods and then
Possibly. Yeah. Yeah,
God.
400, but it's $378 is one price I see
Wow.
online. It's like
Okay.
around $400 is, yeah, super, super common. Yeah. So just to clarify, this test that monitors for all these different foods, those were included in the Vijani and Tarash study. But they were not found to be reactive to this rabbit blood. only dairy, yeast, oats, corn, millet, milk chocolate, instant coffee, and rice. So that's a big deal, especially because it's like, okay, if you have celiac disease or you're reactive to gluten, you're already limited in what you're eating. And actually, one of the points that I wanted to make today was that there is some evidence that a gluten-free diet can lead to certain nutrient deficiencies. So already you're dealing with that. It's like quite a few, like B12, folate, magnesium. And then you get this other study or this other test run based on this, in vitro study. And you're like, wait, I can't have a cup of coffee, like, okay. The reason I wanted
Oh
to come back
God.
to whey is because if people are tolerant to dairy, whey
Hmm.
is a superfood. I don't care how
Yeah.
processed it is. It's like lactulose, highly processed, incredible prebiotic for the body. Whey is like a glutathione precursor. It's incredible evidence showing its ability to help heal
The
inappropriate
gut.
intestinal
Yeah.
permeability. Freaking great easy protein source to increase muscle protein synthesis. Like so many good properties of whey. And it's like, if
Mhm.
that test did not show that the rabbit blood antibodies were reactive to whey, and they tell somebody, based on this crappy backing that they shouldn't eat whey, that's nuts.
That's awful. Also, I mean, I don't know how a study is designed, and I'm not bench research. I have no experience in any of this, but the rabbit, is it typically eating coffee and potatoes like in its regular diet? Like, so that's the first encounter its blood has had with that type of food protein.
Maybe,
So like
and
what
also
should the normal reaction be?
it's blood. I mean, I think people
Yeah,
for like
it's
it's
out of
a
the body.
right. You have like a digestive tract that is like this. God, how could you even describe it? It's like filter up on sensor and sensor and sensor, and
Right.
it's like a neurological sensor, a microbiological, like not even you as a sensor, an
Hmm.
immunological sensor, like all of these different like parts of you kind of being like, hey, all this stuff just came in. How are we going to let it interact with the blood versus like putting blood together with a compound in a petri dish is totally different. Same with our
Yeah.
airways. It's like any intake is like, what is this? Must monitor.
Right. And that's why, like, that type of research, it can be really incredible for getting things going. You mean, like, oh, we need to investigate this more. This is the mechanism. This is fascinating, but like, isn't typically known as high quality research when you're looking at like how to formulate like health recommendations
Right.
or protocols for people or disease, protocols because it's rabbit blood. It's not a person and it
You
can't
know
be
what?
reproduced. And
I want to do better about I'm bad about this. I want to like reach out to I want to contact Vajani and be like, "Hey, could you give us a statement about this or would you come on the podcast like to make it as journalistic as possible?" Because right
Mhm.
now in my mind, I'm like, "This is horrible." But that guy might be like, "Hey, you didn't know about X, Y, and Z."
Exactly. Yes, we should definitely do
I will
that.
email him, Hannah, and ask. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on cross reactive foods. Also, I will say this the man that we love, that we have studied with and found to be incredibly, I always want to say fair and balanced, but that's the tagline for Fox News.
Is it?
Yeah, fair and
That's
balanced.
funny.
That's the tagline.
Okay.
He truly is fair and balanced. Dr. Jason Harlack, he, in the work that he gave us, the research and his clinical experience, he was like, listen, a lot of people do react to corn and oats. Like those are very
Hmm.
common.
Yeah,
So, but you don't need a $400 test to,
to
just kind
tell
of
you
play
that you
around with
should.
that and see. So,
Yeah.
anyway, that's what I've got on cross reactive foods. I'm
Oh
sorry.
man,
Yeah, I
what
will
a mess.
email I should have
Yeah,
emailed
let's
the researchers beforehand, but I will do that.
we'll dig into that more. Okay, really quick, I want to touch on we'll put this paper in in the notes, but it's just looking at manifestations of non-celiac gluten sensitivity that are like outside of the gut. So it's called extraintestinal manifestations of non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And it's from 2018, so it's not super duper recent, but it's really fascinating to look at and start to like think of how it might be showing up in people. And this is not celiac, it's non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
Yeah.
Which is an important like to note that
Yeah.
because I think that it's common for people to go undiagnosed with that because they get the celiac test, they're negative, but they're still having symptoms and they can't figure out what's going on. So let's see. This was, hang on, let me try to.
While you're finding that, I'll just say this tidbit.
Yeah.
It can actually be problematic. Sorry, I just put some ice in my mouth. It's 80 degrees in our apartment. It can actually be problematic sometimes as a clinician when you are like in your bones know that somebody is reacting to gluten and you get a reactivity test and it comes back negative and they're like, see, I told you so. I'm not reactive to gluten. And you're like, would you please just eliminate it for 40 days? It can actually really hold people back. If you have had a food sensitivity test and it came back and you're like, oh, I'm not reactive to this. It's like, I'll keep coming back to this. Gold standard is elimination. So to your point, sometimes you get tested for celiac or you get tested for sensitivity and it's not positive, but there can still be an issue happening.
Yeah, exactly. So in this, they looked at 86 different studies focused on non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and this is what they found. One of the most common reported symptoms was actually canker sores or aphthous stomatitis. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
You did great. I think
Thanks.
it's great.
I actually used to have that. That was pretty bad. Being tired, just not feeling well, brain fog, joint and muscle pain, numbness in the arms and legs.
It sounds like Lyme disease. It's so, and I just like wonder how many people, I mean, you have to get like differential diagnosis to make sure that you have going on what you think's going on, but if you don't rule things out.
And then neurological manifestations like ataxia, neuropathy, even psychiatric manifestations, which I'll dig into a little bit more, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. And then, of course, autoimmune diseases. There is a connection there, with autoimmune thyroiditis. So, just being aware of that, like, and also bladder problems, interstitial cystitis, which I also have. That's a personal aside, but it's really strong connection there. In fact, let me find.
With IC, if people aren't familiar, like if you are it's mainly women. I've actually never seen it in a man, but I have a population of women that I saw for years. If you feel like you have to pee all the time and there's like kind of burning, it's almost like a urinary tract infection, the beginning of it, but it like never goes away.
Yes.
And yes. And Hannah, for sure, I've looked at research into that for a family member. And going gluten-free completely took care of the interstitial cystitis. Look, we're not saying that that's what it is if you have IC, but it's worthwhile to take out gluten and C.
Yeah, same for me. It's pretty wild. So I was trying to find I'll edit this out, but I was trying to find the odds ratio for that. I knew it was somewhere and
really
it was like
strong.
crazy.
I think it's also important to say, and we didn't touch on this at all the last time, if you have an autoimmune diagnosis, probably more than any other topic I've researched is the connection between gluten and autoimmunity. It's sparse, but from a clinical standpoint, take gluten out if you have an autoimmune disease. It just works in the office. It helps so many people with autoimmune disease.
At least try. It's worthwhile to try. So the gluten sensitivity and mental health, I think, is really fascinating. And there is a ton of research on this, a lot of case studies. And I found like a handful, but I think there's more, and we'll put those in the notes. One is from 1976.
Wow.
And it's titled Wheat Gluten as a Pathogenic Factor in Schizophrenia. And in this study, they controlled it pretty well. They did like a gluten challenge. And when they took out gluten, symptoms like improved dramatically. And when they added it back in, they came back. So that's from 1976. That's an old one. I thought that was cool that it was that long ago that doctors were noticing that. There's several case studies in people where it's like they heal. It goes away. And I'm not saying that everybody with schizophrenia, it's caused by gluten.
Right.
But like, it makes me wonder if some people have schizophrenic like symptoms that are created by gluten sensitivity.
Or it makes it
And
worse,
it fits our
or
paradigm of that type of mental illness or makes it worse. Yeah. And
yeah,
so it's really, really worthwhile to look into if you know anybody,
or yourself.
in your family or friends or whatever. It's also linked to both bipolar disorder. Let me pull up this.
I wonder too, like if there's some like fucked up triumvirate like connection between thyroid functionality, mental health, and gluten. Like I
Mhm.
remember reading research, this has been years ago, but I think it was specifically on bipolar disorder and thyroid imbalances.
Mhm.
Because there is absolutely, if people have thyroid, for sure autoimmunity. God, I would love to just like dig deeper into the research on this. I would say thyroid dysfunction generally though, and they eat gluten, it worsens it. And then, okay, if the functionality of the thyroid is also connected to those forms of, how would you call bipolar disorder? Like a mental disease, like a psychological
Mhm.
disorder? I want to respect that,
Yeah.
population, but like there might be some connection there to be aware
Right.
of.
Right. Yeah. One of these is a case study. This is like just incredible to me. It's from 2003. It's called Schizophrenic Symptoms and SPECT Abnormalities in a Celiac Patient Regression After a Gluten-Free Diet.
Mm-hmm.
So in this person had like an abnormality of their frontal cortex that they could actually see on imaging, as well as villus atrophy in their small intestine
Mm-hmm.
and endomysial antibodies, which happens in celiac disease. They started a gluten free diet. Their psychiatric symptoms went away. Their
Right.
gut healed. And then the imaging of their brain, of their frontal cortex, was normal.
Wow.
That to me, and I know it's one person, but
Still, it's
whoa,
like,
that's incredible.
yeah, it's totally
Absolutely
incredible.
incredible. And so I don't know if the ideas of why that's happening have changed, but I believe there's two like lines of thought. One is that in people who are reacting in that way, it's likely that they have intestinal hyperpermeability, leaky gut,
Mm-hmm.
and that's allowing a lot of inflammation to like just be ongoing in the body. And we know about the gut brain axis,
Mm-hmm.
so then that affects the brain and its functioning. The other one is that there are tissue transglutamase proteins in the brain,
Mm-hmm.
and that somehow those are being like attacked, and then that
Yeah.
causes neurological symptoms, psychiatric symptoms. So fascinating. I just feel like that's not really talked about very often.
Mm-mm.
And if you have any personal history with mental illness, like, I'm sure you're aware of how much it affects, everyone's life who's connected to that person who's experiencing that, and just like thinking that it could be a dietary change. I mean, to me, and I know it's not always that simple, it just like is mind-blowing. It's so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's hard to communicate if, even for me, like if you haven't had a personal experience with it, it's like I can understand somebody being skeptical for
mhm.
sure. But yeah, to make a dietary change like that and to see a resolution, even it's like a 10%, 20% improvement, that
Yeah,
can be the difference between feeling functional day to day and feeling hopeless.
exactly. Yeah.
Hannah, I think it would be so cool to ask Sarah to come back on just to talk about this.
Yeah, we should, for
Yeah.
sure, because
Like
there's a
we can
lot
have like a
more
part
to dive
three.
into with that.
Totally. I think that would be a really cool episode and like, I mean, like helpful to people. It's like the fingers of this, it's like, be my guest when we talk to her, look into the research more. It's not just mental illness that is bipolar or schizophrenia, it's anxiety, depression. Like there are like mood disorders that
Mhm.
play into this also.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that would be really cool to keep looking at. And just so wild that it can be connected to this one protein in freaking a grain.
Right. And so when you look at stuff like that, I understand why you'd be like, well, no one should eat this. Like
Right.
if it's this dangerous, like, but it's more complex than that. I
It
mean,
is,
as
yeah.
far as I know, but I also think that like in the first episode when you asked me like should everybody be gluten free, I said no,
Mm-hmm.
and but I also at the same time I think that everybody could not eat gluten and do it in an intentional way and they would be fine. Like,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're getting those nutrients somewhere else.
Yeah.
So,
God, it's like there's so many different caveats of it that I think about.
right. Yeah.
Before we end, I think it's important to speak to the differences between non celiac gluten
Yeah.
sensitivity, celiac disease, and wheat allergy. So we could have an entire episode just about that. It is a true condition, non celiac gluten sensitivity, but the
Yeah.
problem is like there aren't clear diagnostic markers. And Hannah, you jump in if you're like, Victoria, things have
No,
changed.
that's what I know. Yeah.
But the prevalence is pretty high. Like, so for celiac disease, it's approximately 1% of the population. For non celiac gluten sensitivity, it's approximately 6%. So, like, definitely digestive symptoms, but there can be symptoms that aren't related to the digestive system, headache, skin
Mhm.
manifestations, fatigue, depression, canker sores is another
Mhm.
one. That I think that is a really common one. I saw that clinically also. It's like let it in though too, people, a little bit. Like, you are a worm, like you are a big tube surrounded by muscles and bones and organs. This part of you, the tissue and like that, it runs all through you, and the end part is your anus. So if you're seeing symptoms up here in this part of your digestive system, there's probably something happening in other parts of your digestive system also. Canker scores, cavities, inflammation, things that happen with our oral health are, God, I would wonder like what percentage of the time they would be connected to other symptoms happening in the digestive tract. My guess would be a very, very high percentage of the time. So to keep that in mind. But so it's not easy to get diagnosed with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but it absolutely does exist. That is one way that someone can be reactive to gluten. There's a completely like separate way that the body can react to gluten, which is celiac disease. It's an autoimmune disease that
Mhm.
only manifests with the ingestion of gluten. And the body sees gluten as something that it needs to attack, and then it starts to attack the gluten and you. Like, it gets confused based on the ingestion of gluten. So it's like a different way that the immune
Mhm.
system interacts with gluten and with your own cells when you have celiac disease. And then wheat allergy is a completely different ball of wax. It's like a peanut allergy, or it's like that's even another part of the immune
Mhm.
system that can react if you have a wheat allergy. I can't remember the exact mechanisms. I know like wheat allergy is IgE,
Mhm.
celiac disease, I can't remember like the branch of the immune system
Celiac, I think, is a Th1 response, right? Is that right?
to gluten. Girl, I don't
Yeah.
remember. It's been a minute. But I just do remember like there are 3 different ways that you can react. And the reality is that, okay, there are all these different classifications. I mean, 3 specifically for gluten, that we can kind of put people into these buckets. But okay, this is like just a for instance. When I eat pistachios, which are the love of my life, I get horrible canker scores, these like boils. I'm not going to eat it. So it's like, I don't know if it's a true, like, it could cause anaphylaxis at some point, if it's an IgE allergy, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But it's like, there is some amount of body wisdom, I think, that can come in when we're making these decisions, that if we can clear out the like messaging from everywhere and the this and the that and the testing and the influencers and like all these things, it's like, how do you feel when you eat certain foods? In Ayurveda, there's a term for it. God, I have to ask this woman that taught me this. I can't remember like the, whatever like the Hindi words are for it, but it's like you're kind of going against your body's wisdom sometimes.
Mhm.
Like, I did that for years with coffee, where I was like, I know I shouldn't. It makes me feel crazy and crappy, but I love it. If you start to feel that in you, like, that's a good sign. If you see symptoms, that's
Yeah.
a good sign. But if you're not having that and you're just like reading an article in a magazine and you're like, well, I don't think I should eat this food anymore, but you feel fine when you eat it, you don't have symptoms, you're not having a manifestation, think twice.
Yeah.
So that's my takeaway.
I think that's a good takeaway for this episode. Yeah, if anybody has any insight on gluten or your own personal experiences removing it or anything like that, let us know if you want to share. And
Mm-hmm.
because there's just so many different ways it can go and so many ways it can manifest. It's
Yeah.
so different for each person.
It's a great anecdotal story. This naturopath that she's been on the show. She's a hilarious, awesome doctor. She started to have skin symptoms and she basically ruled out like every possible reason that she could be having these certain skin symptoms because she was like, I do not want to take gluten out of my diet. Like, I do not want to have to deal with this. And sure as shit, she has celiac disease. But she was like, damn it.
I
Like,
know.
but the point is, it could be so many other things. It could also be gluten. So
Right.
we'll try to get Sarah on to talk more about mental health specifically related to gluten. And then, yeah, I'll contact Vajani and be like, hey, are we missing something?
Cool.
We should run array fours on ourselves and just see what comes back.
I mean, yeah, you're going to pay for mine.
I think I still have an account with Cyrix somewhere until about 10 minutes after this episode is published. It'll get deleted. Okay. Anything else on gluten?
I don't think so.
We good?
Thanks for listening as always. If you want to leave us a review, please do. It helps us get better. And thanks for coming back every time to listen to us talk about weird stuff, sometimes incoherently and hit out a.
We're so tired, y'all. Okay. Bye, everybody.